This is a video for Summer School Algebra 1, Unit 1, Lesson 3, Solving Equations and Inequalities. All right, in order to solve an equation, we have to use inverse operations. Essentially, we need to understand what our number operations do and how to undo them. So we need to think about what's the opposite of adding? Well, the opposite of adding is subtracting. And while that's true, it's also true that the opposite of subtracting is adding things together. So adding and subtracting are inverse operations of each other. In the same way, the inverse of multiplying is dividing. Well, the opposite of dividing is multiplying. So another set of inverse operations are multiplying and dividing. If you can remember these inverse operations and take your time and think carefully, you will be successful at solving equations. When we use the verb to solve, this means that we want to get the variable. Oftentimes it's going to be represented by the letter x by itself, and we're going to find a number that equals that variable. We're going to start off with some basic equations and work our way to more difficult problems. Once we've mastered the skill of solving equations with an equal sign, that's what equations mean, we'll move on to inequalities in the same way. Each of these examples are going to be followed by a prompt to pause the video and go back to Canvas and look at these short 6-question practices that go along with each level of solving equations. All right, so we're going to do some notes, and then you're going to go and do some practice on your own and then come back to the notes for the more difficult problems. Example 1, we call these level 1 equations in your practice. Okay? Level 1 equations, it says solve these equations for x. Now, when we solve equations, we need to keep things nice and organized. So what I like to do is draw a line down underneath the subtraction bar, underneath the equal sign. The reason I do that is because in order to keep an equation balanced, I have to do the exact same thing to both sides of the equal sign. So that means if I'm going to write something on the left-hand column, I have to write it on the right-hand side. So here, in order to get x by itself, I only have to move the 3. Now the 3 is being added to x. And we said before, the opposite of adding is subtracting. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides of this line. When I subtract 3 on the left-hand side, it actually cancels off because 3 minus 3 is 0. And I'm left with just x on the left, and then 7 minus 3 is 4. So my whole equation there is x, or my whole answer is x equals 4. Now, if you wanted to, you could check your answer here by taking this x equals 4 and substituting it back into the equation for x. So I could take 4 plus 3 equals 7 and see if that's true. Well, 4 plus 3 is 7, and 7 equals 7, so we know that that's right. All right, our next problem here. I start by drawing the bar right down the middle again, and I need to work on how to get x by itself. Well, when I look at this problem, it says 2 times x, and the opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by 2. Dividing by 2 on the left makes those 2's go away. They cancel off. And all I'm left with is x equals -4. -8 divided by 2 is -4. That's my final answer. Again, just as in example A, I could check my work by taking -4 and plugging it back in for 2, or for x. In example C, I start by putting my line down the middle again. Now this one's a little bit more tricky because I have x divided by 3. In order to undo division, I need to multiply. So I'm actually going to multiply by what's in the denominator here. I'm going to multiply both sides by 3. These 3's are going to cancel off, and on the left I'm left with x, and then on the right 6 times 3 is 18. That's my final answer. So what you need to do now is pause the video. You're going to go back to Canvas and look underneath where this video is posted, and you're going to see level 1 practice problems. Click on that, work through those 6 questions, and check your answers with the key or the video, and then come back to the notes and we'll move on to example 2. So go ahead and hit pause now. All right, if you're joining us, you hopefully just completed the level 1 practice problems on Canvas, and now we're going to move on to example 2, which we're calling level 2 equations. Okay? So just as in example 1, we're going to start by solving these equations by putting a line down underneath the equal sign so I remember to keep things balanced. My goal again is to get the variable x by itself. Now here I have a 5x plus 3. So I need to actually start by moving what's farthest away from the x first. So I'm going to move the 3. I'm going to start by subtracting 3 from both sides. When I do this, the 3's cancel out on the left, and I have 5x equals 30. 33 minus 3 is 30. Now I can move the 5 because the 5 is really close to the x. It's being multiplied. To undo multiplication, I divide by 5 on both sides. The 5's cancel off, and I get x equals 6. That is the final answer. Now, as I said in example 1, you can check your work by taking x equals 6 and putting it back into the equation at the top. So let's see, if I took 5 times 6 plus 3, I want to know if that equals 33. Well, 5 times 6 here is 30 plus 3, and I know that 30 plus 3 equals 33. So it checks out that I had the right answer. Now, looking at number 2, or letter B, I'm sorry, I need to get x by itself. Fractions tend to scare us, though, but they shouldn't when you solve an equation. When I solve an equation, it's important that I work with the denominator first. I want to make that 9 go away. So I'm going to make that 9 go away by first multiplying both sides of the equation by 9. When I do that, the 9 cancels off. And I forgot to draw my line for equals. The 9 cancels off, and I'm left with 2x equals 36. Now that I have 2x, this is much nicer to solve. I'm going to divide both sides by 2 to make the 2 go away. And I end up with x equals 18. I can check my work just like I did in problem A. All right, finally here, problem C, our third example of this kind. I have x over negative 6 plus 1 equals 4. This problem is similar to B because we have a fraction. But this problem is going to be different in the fact that I have a plus 1 outside of the fraction. I actually have to take care of that plus 1 first. I have to deal with everything that's not in the fraction before I get rid of the fraction. So I'm going to start here by subtracting 1 from both sides because it's a plus 1 and the opposite of adding is subtracting. So that makes the plus 1 go away, and you're left with x over negative 6 equals 3. Now I do have a fraction, but this fraction is pretty easy to take care of. It's x divided by negative 6. In order to undo division, I multiply both sides by negative 6. That makes them go away on the left and just leave me with x. And I now multiply 3 times negative 6, which is negative 18. You can go ahead and check your work by taking negative 18 and putting it in for x and see if we were correct. Okay, now go ahead. You're going to go back to Canvas. You're going to click on the level 2 practice and you're going to work through those 6 problems. Once you've gotten them all right, you can come back and join us for example 3. So go ahead and hit pause now. All right, welcome back. You should have just finished the level 2 practice on solving equations that were posted on Canvas. Now we're ready for example 3, which are level 3 questions. Now level 3 questions are a little bit more involved than examples 1 and 2. I am always going to still start out the same way. I'm going to put the line down so that I can keep organized. Now, just as I've said in example 2, question C, when I have a fraction, I have to deal with anything that's going on outside of the fraction first. That means in this example, I need to deal with the plus 7. That's not in the fraction. To undo plus 7, I'm going to subtract 7 from each side. That cancels the 7 off on the left, which leaves me with x minus 3 over 2 equals 16. Now I still have a fraction on the left, and I said before that when I have a fraction, I want to get rid of the denominator first. I know there's a minus 3 in the numerator, but that's actually going to be our last step. I have to get rid of the denominator in order to gain access to the numerator. So since 2 is in the denominator and is being divided, I have to multiply both sides by 2. That cancels the 2 off, which leaves me with x minus 3 equals 32. Now my last step allows me to add 3 to both sides. Negative 3 plus 3 gives me just an x on the left and 35 on the right. All right, now if I wanted to check this answer, just like I've been doing in the question A's of every other problem, if I'm going to check this, I'm going to take 35 and put it back in for x on the top of the original problem. So I'll have 35 minus 3 over 2 plus 7. Let's see, 35 minus 3 is 32 over 2 plus 7. Well, 32 over 2 is 16, and 16 plus 7 is 23, not 24, 23, which is exactly what we wanted, so we know that we had the correct answer. All right, last example for level 3 problems here. I start by putting my line down the middle. Same as the last problem, when I have a fraction, I start with anything that is not in the fraction. So here that would be the positive 6. I'm going to end up subtracting 6 from both sides. That makes the 6 cancel on the left and leaves me with negative 5 over 2x equals negative 5. Now, a fraction, again, I just said that we have to move the denominator first. The denominator is being divided, so I need to multiply both sides by the denominator of 2. That 2 ends up going away, and I have negative 5x equals negative 10. Now I only have one more step in order to get x by itself. I'm going to divide by negative 5. And negative 10 divided by negative 5, 2 negatives, and negative divided by negative is a positive 2. So those two examples show us how these level 3 equations work. They're just a little bit more complicated, more steps involved. At this point, you're going to hit pause one more time. You're going to go back to Canvas and look at the level 3 6 example problems. Once you get those right, come on back and join us for example 4. All right, we are now ready for example 4. Hopefully you have just completed the level 3 practice that's been posted on Canvas. Level 4 combines, or I'll say this is level 4 here so you know. Level 4 combines the distributive property and solving equations together. We did the distributive property back in level or lesson 1 of this unit. So before I can even add, subtract, I need to distribute here the negative 2 to both terms inside of the parentheses. I do not want parentheses because that makes it harder to solve. When I distribute the negative 2, I end up with negative 2x plus 14. Negative 2 times negative 7 is positive 14. And I know that that equals 12. Well, now I've gotten rid of all the parentheses, which is a good thing. So I want to get x by itself. I always start with what's farthest away from the x, which is the positive 14. And to get rid of the positive 14, I need to subtract 14 from both sides. The 14's cancel, and I'm left with negative 2x equals negative 2. 12 minus 14 is negative 2. Now the last thing I need to do to get x by itself is to divide by -2, because the -2x is multiplication. When I divide by -2, they go away, and I get x equals. Negative divided by a negative is a positive, so I know my answer is going to be positive. 2 divided by 2 is 1. All right. The last problem for this level is similar to the first one. I need to start by distributing the 4 to both the x and the 1. So 4 times x is 4x, and 4 times 1 is plus 4. But it looks like here I have a -2 on the left-hand side as well. So I still have to think back to unit 1, or lesson 1, I'm sorry, of this unit that had distributing. We also talked about combining like terms in that lesson. So before I can finish solving, I need to actually combine the 4 and the -2. Well, 4 minus 2 is 2. So I'm going to have 4x plus 2 on the left equals -6. All right, so then it's very similar to example A here. I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides, which leaves me with 4x equals -8. Be really careful with your subtraction here. And then to undo this multiplication, I'm going to divide by 4. That leaves me with x equals 2. All right, now you're going to go back to Canvas. Look at the example 4 or level 4 practice problems. They're all going to have distributing and combining like terms while you solve for x. Go ahead and hit pause now. Welcome back. We are ready for example 5, which is our level 5 solving equations problems. These are the last level we are going to do in this lesson. Level 5 problems all deal with having x on both sides. All right, so we can see here in our first example, I have a x on either side of the equal sign. Now our goal when we solve these equations is to get all the x's on one side and all the constants or the numbers on the other. It doesn't matter which side has the x and which side has the constants. They just have to be together. Right? Now I'm going to start here by moving the x's. And I'm going to add 7x. I have -7x on the right, so I'm going to add it to make it go away from the right. So I'm going to add it on both sides. So the x's cancel off from the right. So now on the right, I only have a 10, which is a good thing. On the left, I have 9x plus 7x, which is 16x, and then a -6. Now I only have x's on the left, so now my job is to get the numbers all on the right. So to do that, I'm going to undo this subtraction by adding 6 to both sides. When I add 6 to both sides, it cancels on the left, and I have 16x equals 16. Okay. Now the last step is to get x by itself. 16 times x is what I have on the left here, so I'm going to divide by 16 to make that 16 go away. So my final answer is x equals 1, because any number divided by itself equals 1. All right, last problem here. We had to include a fraction for you. Now I have x on both sides of the equal sign, and I have a fraction. Now, it does not look like there's anything on the left that's going on that's not in the fraction. So to start this problem, I'm going to multiply both sides by 9, because that's then going to get rid of the fraction for me. The 9's cancel off, and I end up with 45x plus 1 equals 90x. 9 times 10 is 90. While I got rid of the fraction, I have one more problem now. I have x's on both sides of the equations, so I need to get the x's all together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this 45x by subtracting it over to the right. And when I do that, I'm left with 1 equals 45x. All right, I wanted to move it to the right this time because I needed to have terms on both sides of that line. Now this time, in order to get x by itself, I'm going to divide by 45. And I end up with the fraction 1 over 45 equals x. I could turn that into a decimal if I wanted, but I'm going to leave it as a fraction. All right, that is all 5 levels of solving equations. There is practice on Canvas for level 5. I would stop the video now, go back to Canvas and look at that practice along with the answer key and the notes and practice video.